another brand new episode of CIO Dimension's Innovation Talk series, where we feature some of India's eminent business technology leaders who talk to us about technology, innovation, leadership, and the changing technology landscape. My name is Radhika Nallayam. I'm the managing editor for CIO Dimension. Today, I have the privilege of talking to one of the finest technology influencers and evangelists of our country, Mr. Muralidharan Ramachandran. A quick introduction is not going to be sufficient to kind of capture the work that he has been doing for the last 3.5 decades in the industry. But let me try my luck anyways. In a rich career spanning 34 years, Mr. Murali has spent over 2 decades at the C-level, serving the roles of a CEO, a CTO, a CIO, CISO, and business head of several companies. He has served in senior management positions of Atos Group and Sintel for nearly 15 years, including that of the CEO of Atos India. His impressive history of success in digital and business transformation has been honored with multiple awards, including being recognized among the top 50 Indian CIOs by CIO Association of India, and also the Hall of the Fame CIO 100 Awards by the reputed IDG Foundry Group, among a host of other recognitions. He has a reputation of being a detail-oriented, result-driven leader who has his feet on the ground. Currently, he offers his CIO, CISO, digital transformation, consulting and advisory services to a number of startups and SMBs, and help them innovate and leverage the power of technology. He is the CIO of Startek, a global CX firm, and is also on the advisory of Network Science, a platform that facilitates collaborative innovation in deep tech. He also works as the global head of strategic initiatives for Mumbai-based Impact Sure Technologies. And of course, Mr. Murali is also an entrepreneur and an angel investor. It's great to have you here as today's guest, Mr. Murali. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join me as part of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Radhika. It's my pleasure as well. But thank you for the lovely introduction. It's my pleasure as well to be on this show. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. I know that introduction really didn't do justice to the work that you have been doing, as I mentioned in the beginning. Great. So let me just dive into some of the questions that I have for you. It's not very often that one gets to see a professional, a leader with so much diversity of leadership experience. You have helmed both the technology and business roles with equal passion and efficacy. And I would like to start off by asking you this. Of all the leadership roles you assumed, whether it's a CEO, CIO, or CTO, which one was the most challenging yet rewarding? And of course, why? Let's start out there.
Sure. Thank you, Radhika. Maybe let me first start off by initially stating that all views that I express in this show are my personal views and do not in any way reflect any opinion of any of my past or current or probably potentially future engagement that I do with various customers and my employers. Right?
Sure,
I think that's the first thing, a disclaimer that I would like to start off with.
Yes.
I know, see, typically what happens is a standard answer that typically most people would respond to this is the CEO role. But I personally have a very different view on this. And I will give you also the rationale behind it. For me, every role has been challenging in a way during the time when I was executing that role. Primarily because we also have to look at it from the perspective that when we move roles or transition into roles, it's also at different points of time. It's not that we are doing the same role at the same point of time in our career. So as you, of course, as you advance your career, you also do various roles. You also mature as you go, right? So for example, to just take a point, the CIO or the CTO role that I started with, my first CTO role was in the year 2001. Now, I cannot compare that role with probably the CEO role that I did for Atos India, or even the CIO roles that I'm doing today, in an advisory, in a virtual CIO mode that is there, right? So, because two things, one, obviously, personally, from an individual's perspective, we are at different position or levels in terms of I would say, our experience levels. Number two, from an external perspective, right? The environment is constantly changing, which means that at different points of time, different types of challenges come up. So therefore, I always believe that I always believe in setting standards for myself rather than looking at societal status, if that is what is the driven, because if that would be the point of view from which I need to respond, it would be the CEO. But I don't believe in that because I think every role that is there is challenging. If you look at my career, one of the things that I've always endeavored to do is ensure that I do different roles or enhanced roles every couple of years. I feel bored doing the same thing again and again beyond 3 to 4 years. So I always ensure that even let's say, even in Intel for that matter, where probably I was the CIO for the first 8.5 years, I worked with them for close to 15 years, Intel, and then the last 4 years post the acquisition of Sintel by Atos, I did different roles. Even within the first 8.5 years that I was the CIO for Sintel, my role changed, even though the title remained the same in terms of scope and enhancements, it changed twice. So that's the way I look at it. The way I look at it is end of the day, and I'm reminded very much of one of my mentors, who always said, and that was a mantra that also drove in one of my organizations, is you are the CEO of your own career. So if you believe that that is what is there, so irrespective of whatever level you are, because when you started your life as a trainee, that work was very challenging at that point of time. Of course, with gray hair and no hair, you reach a different level, but that's a different like of challenge. I think that's the way I would like to respond to this.
Yeah,
Radhika.
in a way, it's good for a person who is somebody like you, is looking at some sort of a challenge all the time. As you mentioned, you're looking at some sort of a change every 3 to 4 years, or some sort of a milestone every 3 to 4 years. And lucky enough for you, the industry is also changing pretty fast, and the roles of a C-level exec is also changing very fast. Which is, thanks for that wonderful answer, Mr. Murali. And I think you've spent the maximum number of years as a CIO and CTO in this whole career, if I'm not wrong. And the
That's right.
CIO role, the CIO role also has evolved a lot in the recent years, I think, especially in the last 10 years maybe. And the CIOs have seized their seat on the boardroom. They have really broadened their horizon within and outside their organizations. And in your journey as a CIO, as a CTO, you have amassed a great deal of experience, both in technology as well as business transformation. In your experience, what is going to be the hardest part for a CIO at this stage? Do you think the biggest hurdle it has been crossed already by the CIO, or what is it that the most challenging or the toughest part for him or her?
Yeah, again, I always, people always prefer to talk about the current situation as a transformational situation that we have. But if you actually look through at every part of the phase, I would say, in industry or the evolution, you always have changes. So whether when you started as the CIO, let's say if you're in the 80s or 90s, a lot of these things would be a back office EDP function, right, which is more of a supporting role, to the transition probably earlier part of this century, where this was more like I would say an enabling role or a partnering role with business, right? Or now we all talk about the IT being more of an enabler to the business rather than from a supporting to a partnering to an enabling. And the way I look at it is the next phase of it would be some sort of a driving the business going forward. And that is basically happened because of the digital transformation that is there. Now, there are pluses and minuses of some of these things. And coming back to your specific pointed question on what is going to be the hardest part, I think one of the challenges that is there today is in terms of the diversity of technology options that is there. The technology evolution is at such a rapid pace, and with a lot of the entrepreneurship that is going on, a lot of startups and other things. Earlier, probably when you If you go back to 3 decades back when we started the career, if somebody wanted to implement an ERP, you had probably 3 or 4 products. You just need to do an evaluation and fix that, right? Take it up and implement it. And those days with SDLC implementation, your ERP implementation itself will take a couple of years to finish, right? But today things are changing, because there are newer products coming up. There are a lot of point solutions coming up. No, I think the evolution of startups today at least in the last decade, I would say is a lot of focus of these startups to solve point problems in the best way they can. So I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is this fast changing technology landscape. While the technology landscape changes very fast, in any enterprise, the biggest challenge is to realize the value of the IT that is going to be implemented. So what happens is people get so enamored by technology and they keep buying new products, but by the time you implement it and realize the business value, okay, that's actually forgotten. So if you ask me, the hardest part of the CIO going forward would be basically filtering a lot of noise. You'll hear a lot of things. There will be a lot of OEMs and vendors coming in and saying that how they are solving problems. Look, you could be hit with 50 possible options of a technology option that you could use. But to get something, select something, get it implemented, ensure that you get the business value out of it is where the focus of the CIO is going to be there. So if I have to sum it up, there are again 3 parts of it, right? And I've been always a hard fan of PPT, not PowerPoint presentation, but people, process, technology. If I put that from a perspective of how the CIO has to be, I would say has to evolve as we're going forward, is from a technology perspective, I think I have been just speaking about it. Choose the technology which is most relevant to your organization. Obviously, you'll have to take your bets on it and then go committed to it. Don't just get, disturbed by too much of noise that keeps coming in, and see how is it that you can get the business value realization going quickly. Processes and people. So now here is where I would always talk about organization. While the CIO may be very tech savvy or the CIO team may be very tech savvy, you need to take your whole organization along. And that's where I would say, if you look at the hardest part of the CIO will be managing change. Okay. So the CIO needs to be a big change manager rather than a technology guy. Now, technology solutions will keep coming. I'm sure, the CIO will have a team who will, help work collaboratively with the business to do that. The CEO is going to go probably on a tour, come back from a conference or, on a flight, meet up with somebody and then say, hey, this is the new technology, this is there. How are we adopting it? These things are going to be there. These pressures are going to be there. But how do you filter those noise out? Put your neck out, take a choice and ensure that you drive change within the organization to focus on the output, which is basically the business value. So that you're not actually doing things just for the sake of technology, but looking at the business value realization of the initiative that you drive.
Right. That's very well summarized. I think in a world where we are spoiled for choices, especially abundance of technology options, it's really something that you need to stay focused on and, really, as you said, declutter the whole thing and make value out of it and all of that. You mentioned PPT and one piece, of course, people. That brings me to the next question, which is basically about talent. Which is a big priority for all CIOs today. And one of the things that the technology leader need, of course, to be successful is the right team and the right kind of talent, of course. But today's landscape, as we know, is very tricky. On one hand, we are talking about the tech skills gap and talent shortage and all of that. And on the other hand, we are seeing mass layoffs in the tech sector. And I think this is a CIO will have to continue to deal with this dichotomy on a continuous basis. How do you think a CIO should balance between building the right talent and doing more with less? as he just evolves in his role, as he builds his roadmap for the organization? How do you think this dilemma can be dealt with?
I think we are having this conversation at a probably little bit better time than what it was 5, 6 years back. Right?
Yeah.
5, 6 years back, when digital was being spoken about, the biggest challenge that IT industry in India had, I'm just putting it as an industry as a whole. It doesn't matter whether you're from the core IT services or any of the end user enterprise adopting IT in domestic consumption. Right. So if you really look at it, right, the biggest challenge was again moving from legacy skills to digital skills. Uh, Good or bad, I think the IT industry grew from late 90s, thanks starting to Y2K, and then in a lot of things around legacy technologies, around mainframe, legacy testing. And these were some of the, I would say, key technology, I would say, focus areas which helped the industry grow and have the recognition that we have today globally as an IT powerhouse in the world, right? So while this has really helped, I think this change, and this also came with a lot of negatives. The scorching pace, especially from 2000 to 2009, or maybe 1997, 1998, when Y2K started, people started working on the Y2K problem till about 2009, that 10, 12 years period, is when most IT companies grew at a scorching pace. Okay, so talent was recruited because why I'm using this is because a lot of the IT talent used to be with the IT services companies and others, right? Because they were paying better and other things. So here, while the companies were growing at scorching pace, this also meant that the company's progression of their employees' progression went much faster. But the flip side of that was that a lot of the progression happened, and primarily if you look at it, a lot of focus during that time was on staffing rather than core delivery, end-to-end delivery. A lot of focus was on staffing. Most companies grew on the staff org mode. So a lot of focus, a lot of people actually got promoted without having dirtied their hands much enough, deep enough, and became manpower managers or staffing managers rather than technology managers. Now that thing has changed in the last decade, thanks to migration from the legacy SDLC methodology to more of agile methodologies, where you have smaller teams where everybody contributes. It's not that you have a monolithic organization, people where, what matters is you have programmers who are typically mostly trainees and the first 3 years who are actually doing all the coding. And anybody beyond 3 years has become a team leader or a project leader and a project manager. They're only doing management of people and resources and not core technology, because the agile thing drove the entire concept of smaller scrum teams where everybody had to contribute. Right now, this drove a change. So I think I would say the problem was a little bit more, I would say, larger, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years back when this transition was happening. Because again, I'm reminded of a famous quote which says, there was something called as the frozen middle.
Okay.
Right. So you have anyway the senior management who are anyway there, who are actually more business leaders anyway. You have the bottom layer, I would say bottom few layers, who are anyway hardcore technologists, but the middle management, who had to be probably scrum leaders and other things, did not possess enough technical competency because they had lost touch with it, because they were focused more on resource management rather than focus on technology and other things. So I think that was a little bit of a problem, which is slightly better today, I would say. So basically, the way I look at it is there are two things, right? I think today a lot of focus has to be on developing digital skills. Now, there are again 2-3 ways to look at it. Some of the challenges that we are seeing in terms of layoffs and other things, my personal view is that there are two things. One, I think, is obviously, I would say, imprudence in terms of organizations, hiring, assuming that there's no tomorrow, or you may lose out on talent. So you tend to hire when your days are good in the anticipation of business, and suddenly when obviously business does not come at the same pace, you're suddenly saddled with costs, and especially if you're a listed company or company which is looking for funding where profitability is also becoming an issue right now, especially in the startup world where there's a lot more focus on, on profitability. At least a lot of startups that got listed, the shareholders start looking at profitability also. This becomes a challenge. So if you ask me, my personal view is that, I prefer working in a cloud model. Now, what I meant to say a cloud model is, again, if you look at it, majority of Indian organizations, especially with a large amount of cash pile that they have in their balance sheets, preferably now prefer to use a capex model rather than a opex model. So typically what organizations do is they spend capex, which they host it in their own data center. And then if there is burst, they always have seasonal requirements of computing capacity or any other things that you need, you actually can go to the cloud. So if you take the same analogy in the talent side, you create a core organization within the company, if based on the core areas that you need to support. And then of course, when you have a talent gap, a specific talent gap, or a specific burst capacity that you need, you always work with contractual staff. So that probably would be a better way to manage from a capacity perspective. From a competency perspective, right? Obviously, you still have to focus on upskilling your team. And that's what I said, I go back to the previous question. The problem is if you get swayed off by everyday changes in technology, it's going to be a problem. But you pick up a few technology stacks that you want to pick it up for your organization, and you focus on upskilling your folks there. Obviously, if you do have challenges around upskilling, of course, you need have to replace them. But that's something that will be there, because that's the right balance between what I would say, at least using some of our cultures of rewarding loyalty to people, and not a iron fire policy. At the same time, also being reasonable enough in terms of ensuring that you have the right talent to support the initiatives that you need to execute.
Great. So some of these talent management models will evolve as the requirement changes. As you rightly said, the cloud model on talent is something that's very interesting to look at. I'm sure organizations are already kind of evaluating many of these options in the industry. That's great. And, you spoke about digital. I mean, in many places you mentioned digital as digital skills and all of that. I also want to understand digital transformation at some stage was the biggest opportunity for a CIO, has been in the last maybe 5 years. That made him the real change maker within the organization. Now, from now on, what do you think will be the biggest opportunity for a CIO? How is the CIO role going to evolve from here on, especially when we are talking about a set of new advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, and what that really can do to a business. And as a custodian of technology, as a major decision maker of what really needs to be deployed within the organization, who takes a call on all of that. How do you think the CIO role is changing from this point onwards, and what will be the biggest opportunities for a CIO?
See, one of the changes that is happening with digital transformation is, every company is now becoming a tech company.
Yeah.
Right? So to that extent is where I think there is a huge amount of an opportunity to the CIO to make a difference. Now, obviously, industry will always come with various jargons. Some people will say we have a CIO, we have a CDO, a chief digital officer, a chief data officer, right?
Innovation officer,
chief innovation officer. Now, these are all various titles that we could give. And so basically, and I would say that end of the day, the CIO is the person that is where we started with long back. Now, if the CIO can evolve into getting into some of these aspects of all this data, digital and all those things, where all these roles can actually be summarized into a CIO role itself. Okay, so to that extent, the role is becoming a little bit more complex. It's no longer about just keeping the lights on, and this is where a CIO has to evolve to say that, am I focusing more on keeping the operational stuff, keeping the lights on, or am I transitioning myself to be a business driver, not even an enabler, but business driver, leveraging some of these digital technologies that are there now. Again, as I said, and I think we spoke about it earlier in the chat as well. Important that we don't just get enamored by technology, because business, so, any business that you take has to work on some fundamentals, right? And I personally, I look at four areas where eventually we'll have to look at the impact, because end of the day, whatever said, digital is a driver, enabler, supporter, whatever you want to say, because these are all adjectives that we can use or adverbs we can use. But what is going to be more important is, end of the day, how does it drive business results? Now, business results are driven only by four key parameters. Number one is revenue. Number two is cost, optimizing cost. So any digital initiative that is going to drive revenue growth, or is it going to optimize cost, or is it going to significantly enhance customer experience? And fourth is addresses regulatory challenges, because end of the day, I think we also need to do with a lot of these adoption of digital technologies. Also is coming a lot of associated risks. With every opportunity, there's an equal and risk that gets created. And that's why we have this huge spurt of cyber challenges that the industry is facing and everybody is talking about. Again, transition of for a good role for a CISO, right? Who used to be a part of IT function. Today, CISO is role is expected to be reporting to the board and audit committee, so that they can look at those risks. So anyway, coming back to it, these opportunities create an equal amount of risk, and that is also driving a lot of regulations. Okay, the regulatory, if you look at SEBI and other things, look at the amount of circulars that we've been taking out in terms of regulatory compliance requirements for various regulated entities. Now, when you look at that, some of those things, regulation becomes a very key important element, and that's again where technology helps, right? Again, so that's where a CIO has to work very collaboratively with the chief compliance officer, the CFO, and others to basically drive a lot of those things. So if you look at any of these transformation, rather than being focused on the input of what technology, whether it is generative AI or whether it is IoT or whether it is NLP or whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. But if you can create the use cases of how you can drive one of these outcomes, is where the focus has to be. I think if that is something which is there, all your digital transformation initiatives is aligned. It becomes easier to align with the overall organization goal, and that adds value to the organization. Otherwise, see, let's also honestly see, there's one thing which has not changed in the industry over the last 20 years: success rate of IT projects. Okay, 65-70% of the ERP projects used to fail 2-3 decades back. Today, also, if you look at analytics or AI or any of these things, success rates are still at the same rate. That is one thing which has remained a constant. And that is because it's not because of technology, because everybody is focused on the input and not on the output. Right? I think that's where I see, a lot of change that is there. So again, key points again, it's very simple. Filter out the noise, focus on the outcome, choose your battles that you need to do. But number two is, anyway, we talked about it, change management, because when you are looking at any of these things, you have to take the whole organization along. Otherwise, you could be like a Kodak and others, who you may be very great in technology, but if you're not able to rally your whole organization around you, the other stakeholders around you, you're not going to achieve the output that you need.
Absolutely. Though technology is changing really fast, I think the fundamentals of business is not changing, right? Revenue, profit, you need to manage the cost. That's really not going to go away. That's going to be the reality.
Right.
Every CIO is going to invest on any technology. Wonderful, wonderful insights, Mr. Murali. Lastly, I want to kind of ask you about the work that you're doing at the startup front. You've worked with many startups, and you've also led multinational companies like Atos. And the general perception is that startups are more agile as compared to their enterprise counterparts. They're open to adapt and innovate fast. they're open to failing fast and bouncing back fast and all of that. But what are the gaps that you try and fill in while you work with these startup companies?
Okay, since you asked me both questions, I'll have to answer both. I think first and foremost is, I think eventually it's a culture that you drive within the organization. Uh, Even larger companies can be agile as long as they create an ecosystem that drives that. But anyway, to some extent, obviously, decision making is not centralized. Okay, in a startup, it's much easier because you probably have a few founders or a few key managerial persons. It's much easier to drive decision making in those organizations. But I think where I think the startups need a lot of support is, a lot of these startups have a lot of good ideas. They're all youngsters who are technology very savvy, and that's something which one of the I would say reasons why I work with startups is I learn a lot from them. Also because the way they think. Okay, we are all out, old school thought, right? And when you actually start working with younger entrepreneurs, you get to see a very different view or point of view, the way they look at things. So that's the learning that you do. So one of the objectives that I'm associated with startups is to also learn a lot from them. But where we can contribute back to them is the industry knowledge, right? End of the day, while a technology solution can be great, how do you really apply it in business scenarios? How do you generate those use cases that can actually drive value to the organization, to the customer? Because otherwise, again, like our earlier chat in the earlier part of the show, it'll just be a great technology or a great product, but there will be a product market gap or a fit gap, right? So where I think senior people like us, like me, and some of the others that you started in the show to say there are a lot of other CIOs and a lot of senior executives who are moving out and getting associated with startups, is we are able to help them with really figure out the product market fit, right? So that's where a lot of help comes. And of course, having worked with large companies, you also help in a little bit of governance. Without taking names, we have seen some recently, some startups, which have grown very, very aggressively, huge valuations, but governance gaps have come in. I'm not going to take names, right? But this is where I think there is this blend of youth and experience can help, right? Experienced people like us can actually bring in value in terms of setting up some governance processes. But of course, there's also a learning for us in terms of ensuring that we learn a lot from them, and also ensuring that, of course, we don't stifle the growth. So that's where I need to be careful. So I consciously work on it. Having worked with large companies, sometimes you tend to be so process centric that can actually come in the way of agility. So one has to make a conscious, I would say, effort to ensure that you don't stifle that agility which is there and fail fast and other things that you talked about. Now, incidentally, good part about me is, maybe I'll just say, proudly say that, for me, association with startup has always been there throughout my life.
Okay.
I don't know whether you observed in my profile, I started my first job in a startup.
Oh, yeah.
So technically in 1988, I was the first employee to join that company. Then, of course, I worked with a couple of companies. And again, in 2000, and after having worked with TCS and Satyam, again, I worked with a startup. So unfortunately, didn't work out those times, as I said, but learned a lot in that. Unfortunately, that was a time when the dot-com bust happened, right? So because of that, we couldn't get funding and we would drive that. Yeah. But so this, I would say, has always been a case for me. Even within Syntel, I have incubated businesses. So, 2007, 2008, when Syntel was still mostly on the application development side, I helped win the first couple of contracts when they wanted to get into the infrastructure management space.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I incubated the cybersecurity business in 2018 for Syntel. Okay, when I was the business head for the cybersecurity role, of course, the infrastructure practice was an additional role which I did along being the CIO, right? When I had joined as a CIO. So to that extent, I have been always associated with that startup mindset, if I have to put it that way. So that is helping me a little better. But of course, end of the day, we have to be a little bit conscious and to help them, to help the startup, and not forget that they still need to be nimble and agile.
Okay, that's great. And it's wonderful that you're doing what you're passionate about and you are in the thick of the things. And it's a great pleasure talking to you, Mr. Murali. And thank you so much for taking the time out to be part of this conversation.
Right, pleasure is mine as well, Radhika. Thanks for inviting me to this show. It's a pleasure always to talk to you. I'm looking forward to many
Great.
more sessions in the forward, right? Thank you very much and have a great day.
You too. Bye.